Welcome to the Montana Settlement Chronicles, a new series about 1880s Montana near modern-day Red Lodge. Follow Nathaniel Cutter and his family as they work to build a life near the rugged Beartooth Mountains. Sit back, relax, and enjoy this first tale in the Montana Settlement Chronicles. The Calm After Ghost Rock. Chapter 1. The Edge of the Prairie. The dawn wind came down from the mountains, sharp enough to sting Nathaniel Cutter's cheeks as he stepped out of the barn. The air carried the scent of frost-cracked pine and the low, warm musk of the cattle huddled near the corral. Beyond them, the prairie stretched pale and endless to where the first trace of sunlight touched the snowcaps of the Beartooth Mountain range. He stood a moment, letting the silence settle across his shoulders. Peace was still a new sort of feeling for him, though 21 years had passed since the war. After the thunder of cannon and the scream of iron through air, even the creak of the stable door seemed sacred. Nathaniel ran a hand along the rough post of the fence, checking for give. A flicker of movement caught his eye, 3 riders on the horizon, silhouettes against the gold wash of dawn. His grip on the post tightened before his mind caught up. Then he saw the way the lead rider raised a hand in quiet greeting, palm open, and his own shoulders eased. "Good morning, Red Elk," he murmured to himself. The trust between them had taken years to build, years of small gestures, of shared work and cautious words. What began as wary distance had grown into neighborly respect. They traded meat for seed, hides for flour. When one lost livestock in a storm, the other shared what could be spared. Inside the cabin, Josie's voice called to the children, her tone already firm with the rhythm of another long day. The smell of wood smoke drifted across the yard, rich and familiar. Nathaniel smiled faintly. He turned back to his chores, the old ache in his shoulder reminding him of battles far away and long ago. By mid-morning, he would hitch the wagon and head toward the settlement, 15 families strung like beads across 10 miles of wind and grass, bound by need more than proximity. There was talk of grinding new flour at the mill and a community gathering at week's end, when the preacher would serve as both teacher and shepherd. Nathaniel tugged his hat lower as the sun broke clean over the ridges. For now, all he could see was open land and the promise it held, hard, uncertain, but alive. Chapter 2. The Settlement Road. By the time the sun climbed above the prairie, the Cutter wagon was rolling down the narrow dirt track toward the settlement. The horse's breath plumed white in the chill air. Josie had packed a sack of dried beans and a bundle of oats to trade, wrapped neatly beneath the wagon seat. Tobias sat beside his father, small boots swinging above the boards, eyes wide on the valley unfurling before them. "Can we see Miss Clara's colt today?" he asked, not quite able to hold still. "If she lets you," Nathaniel answered, his tone carrying more warmth than warning. The road threaded between wide homesteads, patches of turned earth, split rail fences, and stands of young cottonwood marking creek beds. Most families have been here since the early '80s, drawn by free land and hope stronger than good sense. Nathaniel lifted a hand as he passed the McCall's place, where Jonah McCall leaned on a fence post, mending wire. The man nodded back, pipe stem clenched between his teeth. Farther along, smoke rose from the blacksmith's forge near the settlement center. A scatter of low buildings gathered on a gentle rise. The sound of a hammer on hot iron echoed across the plain, steady and sure as a heartbeat. Tobias craned forward, grinning at the sight of it all. The small store with its peeling sign, the schoolhouse that doubled as a church, the livery bright with sunlight on its tin roof. Nathaniel reined the team to a stop near the hitching posts. Clara Whitfield, the merchant's wife, waved from the store porch. "Morning, Nate. Josie send that blackberry jam she promised." "She did," he said, lifting the wrapped jar from the wagon bed. "Said to tell you the berries came sweeter this year, so don't let it sit too long." Clara laughed and caught the jar with both hands. "You tell her that jam never stand a chance in my kitchen." Inside, the store smelled of wood, flour, and horse liniment, a clean, honest scent that felt like community itself. A few men stood talking near the counter about a stray herd seen close to the creek. Another mentioned travelers spotted north of the ridge, government men or trappers. No one knew for sure. Nathaniel listened, but spoke little, his mind turning instead to the riders he'd seen that morning. Red Elk's wave had meant peace, but peace was never a guarantee on this land. It was a season, cherished while it lasted, prayed for when it waned. As he stepped back out into the sunlight, Tobias tugged his sleeve. "Pa, can I run to the schoolhouse? Miss Bennett's got something for me." Nathaniel nodded. "Don't break your neck getting there." He watched the boy sprint down the road, his laughter scattering across the open air. For that moment, the land seemed steady and good. Families working, children playing, the mountains standing watch in the distance. Nathaniel exhaled, fingers resting against the brim of his hat. The day felt right. But somewhere between the peaks and the horizon, a single line of dark clouds was already forming. Chapter 3. The Gathering Storm. The air carried the scent of rain long before the clouds showed. A high, copper-colored haze hung over the mountains, and the wind that came down from the slopes had lost its summer softness. Nathaniel Cutter noticed it early, standing over the cutting table beside his wife as she packed jars of late beans in a brine. "Storm's coming," he said, glancing toward the western ridge. Josie didn't look up from her work. "Then we best get the beans done before it breaks." Outside, the children moved between the rows of the lake garden. Owen and Levi gathering squash, Lydia and Tobias carrying baskets with proud seriousness. Their laughter mixed with the low clunk of pails and the drone of crickets. The land yielded more this year than any Cutter had hoped for. The wheat stood high, the root cellar nearly full, and for the first time in months, there was more to preserve than worry over. But Nathaniel's eyes kept drifting toward the mountains. The peaks were fading under a veil of rolling thunderclouds, the kind that turned daylight to dusk in minutes. He thought of Red Elk's visit 2 nights before, a brief word about bands of horse traders skirting the eastern ridges, men who didn't share the same careful peace their own people had built here. "That treaty brings more strangers every week," Red Elk had said, his voice even but weary. Land changes hands faster than a river can wash it clean. Now, as the wind picked up, Nathaniel felt that truth settle deep in his chest. He trusted Red Elk, had done so since the first winter after their arrival, when the Crow Elder had shown him how to store jerky against the mold and how to read the animal tracks after snowfall. Still, he knew trust could only stretch so far before fear began to fray it. He lifted his head as the first crack of thunder reached them. "Owen, get the stock in." The boy dropped his basket and ran toward the corral. Flashes of lightning flickered above the ridgeline. Within minutes, the wind tore through the prairie, flattening the tall grass in trembling waves. Dust whipped through the yard, and May began to cry from the cabin doorway. Nathaniel shouting orders over the wind was a sound his children knew well by now. Steady, firm, never panicked. By the time the rain struck, the family had the gates secured and the harvest covered with tarp. They stood for a breath on the porch, soaked and grinning, the storm roaring around them. Josie smiled at her husband. Even August has her moods. Nathaniel looked toward the distant dark range where the Crow camp lay beyond the valley, hidden behind shadow and rain. "Aye," he said quietly, "and she doesn't strike alone." The thunder rolled again, deep, echoing, as if answering him from the mountains themselves. Chapter 4. After the storm. By dawn, the storm had spent itself. A thin mist clung to the prairie like breath on glass, and the air carried the sharp, clean scent of soaked sage. The Cutter yard glistened under a glassy film of dew. Nathaniel moved through the mud, checking fence lines, riding a water barrel that had tipped in the night. One of the hens squawked from a broken pen, feathers matted but unharmed. The damage was light, mercifully so. The fields had drunk deep, leaving the soil darker and richer. Here and there he spotted flattened beans and torn stalks, but nothing they couldn't mend. He straightened, stretching the ache from his back, and caught movement at the edge of the property. 3 riders approached from the north, their horses weaving slowly through the wet grass. The lead rider's blanket gleamed a rain-dark red. Even from a distance, Nathaniel recognized him. "Red Elk?" he muttered under his breath. By the time they reached the yard, Josie had come out onto the porch, her shawl drawn snug. Tobias clung to her side, blinking into the morning light. Nathaniel wiped his hands on his trousers and stepped forward. Red Elk dismounted in silence. He was older now, lines deep around his eyes, silver at his temples, but his stance held the easy dignity of command. Beside him, 2 younger men remained mounted, their expressions unreadable. Red Elk inclined his head in greeting. "You still stand after the storm," he said. Nathaniel smiled faintly. "The land hit us light this time. Seems she's showing mercy, or maybe she's saving her strength." Red Elk's gaze drifted over the homestead, the garden quilts, the smoke rising from Josie's cook fire, the children peering from behind the door. "You have built well here," he said softly. "Your house grows strong. But too many such roofs are rising where my people once hunted. The treaty opens the door, and the door does not close." Nathaniel's throat tightened. "I know," he said, "and I wish I had more say in who walks through it." Red Elk looked back toward the far hills. "More will come before snow." Some will carry greed in their eyes. Others fear. We will watch both, and I ask that your people do the same. You have my word, Nathaniel said. Red Elk studied him for a long moment, then nodded. We keep peace by the width of a breath, Nathaniel Cutter. Guard that breath well. He remounted without ceremony, the younger riders following. As they rode off, the rising sun broke through the clouds, laying pale light across the wet prairie. Nathaniel stood there until the horses had vanished beyond the grass. Behind him, Josie's voice called from the porch. What did he say? Nathaniel turned toward her, eyes still on the horizon. He said the peace holds. For now. Chapter 5. New Neighbors. The smell of wet earth still hung heavy in the air when the first wagon rolled across the Cutter's north pasture. Nathaniel spotted it from the ridge, a covered rig sagging under crates and hope, pulled by a pair of weary mules. A second wagon followed, smaller but packed tight. A man walked beside the lead team, long-boned and sunburned, his coat patched at the elbows. By the time they reached the Cutter homestead, Josie had stepped onto the porch, smoothing her apron. Nathaniel met them halfway down the road, hand lifted in greeting. Morning to you, he called. The man stopped, removed his hat, and smiled with relief. Name's Elias Hartwell. My wife and I came from east of Billings. We're looking to settle, good farmland for the children, maybe near the mountains where the water runs straight. Nathaniel's eyes traced the distant ridges, gray and solemn beyond the prairie. You'll find water plenty closer to Billings, he said. And less trouble doing it. Elias frowned. Folks back that way said the land was near all taken. We got turned from 3 claims already. Thought we'd try south a stretch. Nathaniel nodded slowly. South brings you close to Crow country. The treaty lines are newer than the fences out here. What looks empty isn't always free. A woman's voice called from the wagon, Elias's wife, Martha, her bonnet crooked and her tone brisk. We heard talk of Crow lands, but the map from Fort Custer said settlers were allowed as far as the slopes below those peaks. A map can lie without meaning to, Nathaniel said gently. Those slopes, what you see as fine grazing, they call sacred. Their people have buried generations there. You drive so much as a fence post in that ground, and you'll stir more than soil. Elias shifted his hat in his hands, expression hardening. All respect, sir, but we've come too far to turn back now. The land looks sound. If we break a bit near the creek, we'll have enough to see winter through. Nathaniel saw the quiet determination in him, the same raw grit that drove every family this far west, but also the same blindness that ended peace before it began. There's room enough on the flats between here and Billings, he said, voice low but firm. Move there, and your children will sleep easy. Elias shook his head. Appreciate the warning, friend, but we didn't come all this way to stop short. Nathaniel watched the wagons rumble on, cutting a slow path toward the shadow of the mountains. Josie joined him at the fence, her hand finding his arm. They'll come to grief out there, she murmured. He nodded. Red Elk won't take kindly. I'll ride to him tomorrow, see if warning counts for anything. Far off, thunder still muttered beyond the peaks, though the sky stood clear. Nathaniel exhaled, uneasy. Storms had a way of circling back, no matter the season. Chapter 6. Words Beneath the Pines. The ride to Red Elk's camp took half the morning. The air was warm, heavy with the smell of sage and damp grass, and Nathaniel's horse left dark prints through the meadow. Thin threads of smoke rose ahead where the Crow lodges stood, half in shadow, half in sun, like memories caught between worlds. He dismounted at the edge of camp, letting the horse drink from a shallow creek. A few children nearby paused in their play to watch him, their faces curious but unsmiling. Nathaniel tipped his hat and moved toward the circle of lodges. Red Elk sat on a low stool near a fire, carving a piece of cottonwood into a small figure. When he looked up, the faintest smile lined his mouth. "You ride early, Cutter," he said. "That means your heart is heavy." Nathaniel removed his hat and crouched by the fire. A new family came through yesterday, Elias Hartwell and his wife. They've pitched their wagons toward the lower slopes by the creek fork, not far from Ghost Rock. The carving knife halted in Red Elk's hand. His eyes narrowed, though his tone stayed calm. "That place is not theirs to touch." "I told them as much," Nathaniel said quietly. "Try to send them down the flats toward Billings. But they've made up their mind. They think the maps from the fort give them a right." Red Elk set the carving aside. "The maps know nothing of the bones buried there. My father's father hunted elk below Ghost Rock before your people came. That ground belongs to stories older than their ink." "I know," Nathaniel said. "And I told them, but they've children, and they're worn thin. They don't see danger in the soil, only the promise of pasture." Red Elk leaned forward, eyes fixed on the flames. "A man who sees only land for his plow is blind to the spirits that watch it. If that blindness spreads, there will be no peace between our camps." Nathaniel hesitated. "You do well to let me talk with them again. Maybe they'll listen." The Crow leader shook his head. "There will be talk, Nathaniel Cutter, but not with words. The law of the treaty is made by men far away. The law of the mountain is older, and it is not patient." A chill passed through Nathaniel that had nothing to do with wind. "You mean to act against them?" Red Elk didn't answer at once. He picked up the unfinished carving, a small bear, and ran a thumb along the grain. "Tell them to move before moon's end. After that, the mountain will answer as it chooses." The knife flashed once in the light, clean and decisive. Nathaniel watched him work, each cut swift and final. "I'll tell them," he said at last, rising to his feet. "And I'll pray they're wiser than they seem." Red Elk looked up from the carving. "Pray yes, but tie your horse near the door when you sleep." Nathaniel gave a small nod, placed his hat on his head, and turned back toward the open prairie. The wind had stilled, but the air felt tighter than before, as though even the land was drawing breath, waiting. Chapter 7. The Valley of Ghost Rock. The creek fork glittered in the August sun, narrow and winding through grass, so green it looked almost painted. Elias Hartwell stood at the edge of it, both hands braced on his hips, and let out a long breath. Look at that. Martha, he said. Water clear as glass, good soil, land enough for the boys to run. Feels like Providence itself. Martha stepped down from the wagon, her skirts brushing the tall grass. The younger children climbed from the back, their laughter sharp in the still air. It's fine land, she admitted, but quiet. Too quiet. Elias smiled, lines deepened by sun and hope. After 3 months on the trail, quiet's a blessing. He began unloading, axes, seed sacks, the short-handled spade. His eldest, Daniel, a boy of 12, joined him. Together they marked a line where a cabin might stand. The sound of labor filled the valley, the thunk of an axe against cottonwood, the squeak of the wagon boards, the ring of iron on stone. By midday they'd cleared a small patch by the creek and started to cook fire. The slopes above shimmered under a haze of heat. They hadn't noticed it at first, a pile of pale stones on the ridge beyond the stream, stacked in a neat spiral. It looked deliberate, but Elias took it for an old boundary marker. Martha noticed it too. "What do you think that is?" she asked. "Old cairn, maybe," Elias said. "Been here a long while." She frowned. "Feels like someone's watching." Elias chuckled softly. "Just your nerves talking. You'll see. Once we set walls, this'll feel like home." By late afternoon, thunder rolled faintly from the mountains again. Not a storm yet, just a warning rumble. The wind shifted, carrying the faint smell of pine smoke and something else, sweet, sharp, almost floral. Martha turned her head toward the slopes. The spiral stones stood out clearer now, a white ring against the grass. For a moment she thought she saw movement, a figure on horseback, far off, still as a shadow. "Elias," she said quietly, "there's someone up there." But when he looked, the ridge was empty again. Night came swift in the valley. The Hartwells kindled a lantern, ate in silence. Elias told stories to the children until their eyelids drooped. The stars came out one by one, bright and cold above Ghost Rock. From the ridge beyond the creek, a single torch flickered for a heartbeat, then vanished into darkness. Chapter 8. Voices in the Grass. The night came on heavy and close. No wind, no sound but the slow crackle of the cook fire and the horses' faint shifting by the creek. Elias Hartwell sat with his rifle balanced across his knees, his brow damp in the orange glow. Martha had taken the children into the wagon, bundling them beneath quilts. She'd left the lantern burning low, a thin pulse of light leaking through the canvas. Every once in a while, Elias could see the faint silhouette of her head moving, checking that the little ones still slept. It might have been near midnight when the first sound came, soft, deliberate, close. Not the wind, not some wild creature. Something moving out there. He raised the rifle just slightly, eyes scanning the dark edges of the firelight. The grass stood high, whispering under its own weight. The horses snorted and backed against their traces. He waited, listened. There was again a footstep. No, more than one. A faint murmur, like human breath against the stillness, followed by a sharp click of stone striking stone. One of the dogs growled and went silent. "Martha," he called low. She pulled aside the canvas flap, her face pale in the faint light. "Elias?" "Stay quiet," he said. "Keep the children still. Might be coyotes nosing about." But even he didn't believe it. He rose slowly, taking a few steps toward the dark line of the creek. The firelight cut short just before the water, leaving half the world unseen. He could feel the rest of it, the eyes, the presence, the watchful patience of whatever stood beyond his reach. Then came a sound that turned the marrow inside him cold, a low hum, almost a chant, rising and falling with the rhythm of breathing. It lasted only a moment, then faded like it had never been. The night swallowed a whole. He waited another full minute before lowering the rifle. Nothing more came, only silence, deep and sealed. At first light, the valley bloomed gold and soft with mist. Martha stepped out of the wagon, moving slow, her shawl drawn tight around her shoulders. "I heard them," she said, voice thin. "They were all around us, Elias." He poked at the ashes of the fire, jaw tight. "I didn't see a soul." "But you heard them." He didn't answer. Martha looked toward the ridge where the spiral of white stone stood. In the cold morning light, it seemed larger, sharper, alive. "This isn't our place," she whispered. "The earth doesn't want us here." Elias rose, pushing his hat low over his brow. "This land's just land, Martha. Same dirt, same water as any other. We'll build, and in time it'll know us." She turned away, eyes glistening though her voice stayed steady. "It already knows us, Elias. That's the part that scares me." He said nothing for a long moment, only the distant rush of the creek and the soft moan of morning wind answering her words. Then he went to fetch his tools, driven by that stubborn ache that made men west of the Missouri refuse to bow to anything, not even the dead. Chapter 9. The Second Warning. By mid-morning, 4 riders crested the low ridge east of Ghost Rock. The sun glared off the wet grass, still glazed from last night's dew. Nathaniel Cutter rode in front, jaw set, his hat pulled low. Behind him came David Harney, a stocky man with honest eyes. Rick Hogan, broad-shouldered and quiet. And Lee Powers, whose quick temper rarely hid behind his easy grin. They said little as they rode. Each knew why they were coming, and each hoped the talk would end with words, not consequences. The Crow had been patient, more than anyone had a right to expect, but patience wore thinner than leather when a man's ancestors were buried beneath strange plows. The Hartwell homestead, if it could yet be called that, sat crooked by the creek. A single shed frame stood half-finished. Martha hung laundry nearby, every motion deliberate and weary. The children gathered wood under her watchful eye. Elias was splitting rails when the riders came down the hill. He looked up, pushing sweat from his face, and waved them closer as though relieved for company. "Morning," he called. "You boys here to lend a hand?" Nathaniel reined in, dismounted, and handed his reins to Lee. "Not today, Elias. We came to talk." Elias frowned, sensing the weight behind Nathaniel's tone. Talk about what? The land you've chosen, Nathaniel said. It's not safe. Not for you, not for your children. Elias leaned on his axe handle, chest rising and falling. I've heard that speech already, Cutter. You've made your point. Rick shifted in his saddle. You haven't heard it from all of us. David Harney swung down, pulling off his gloves. You think we like riding this far to warn a man? We've been building trust with Red Elk's people since before any of us had 2 boards to our names. First few years, we slept with rifles loaded. Now there's peace, a brutal kind. You settle where you're standing, you'll shatter it. Elias' grip tightened. I'm too tired to pack everything and start again. I've got a wife half sick from the trail and children that need a roof before snow comes. This spot has water, timber, and soil that'll grow. Lee Powers spit into the dirt, shaking his head. So you'll trade your family's safety for good soil? I'll trade another winter on the trail for it, Elias shot back. Nathaniel stepped closer, lowering his voice. Elias, this isn't just stubbornness anymore. You're lighting a fire that'll burn more than your cabin. Red Elk warned you, through me. That ridge above you is sacred ground. His patience is finished. Martha came forward, hands wringing the edge of her apron. Her eyes darted from man to man, landing finally on Nathaniel. Please, she said softly. He doesn't mean harm. He just can't think of turning back. Nathaniel's expression softened, but his words didn't. Ma'am, none of us doubt your hearts. But intent doesn't matter out here, actions do. This land remembers every wrong done to it. A long silence settled between them, broken only by the wind sliding through the grass. Elias stared at the ridge, the pale stones bright under the sun. His jaw flexed once, then set. I'm staying, he said. This land's all we've got left. Nathaniel closed his eyes briefly, then put his hat back on. Then God help you, Elias, because no one else will be able to. He turned for his horse. The others followed in silence. As they rode away, Rick glanced back. He'll get us all hurt if he stays. Nathaniel didn't answer. He didn't have to. The truth was beating just as loud in his own chest. Behind them, Martha watched the riders fade into the horizon. The laundry flapped sharply in the wind, sounding almost like warnings whispering through the cloth. She looked toward the ridge where the spiral of stones gleamed white and cold, and shivered. Chapter 10. The Trespass. The morning air was thin and sharp, carrying the cool scent of distant rain. Red Elk rode with 4 companions, scouts from his band, men seasoned by war and peace alike. They followed a deer trail that wound along the base of Ghost Rock, hooves whispering through the grass. He had not meant to come this far today, but a hawk's cry had turned his head at dawn, and he had taken it as a sign. The mountains gave signs freely to those who listened. As they crested the last low ridge, the sight below stopped them cold. Smoke rose in easy coils from the valley, a curl of cook fire beneath the morning sun. 2 wagons, a half-built cabin, rails stacked for fencing. And there, by the cracked line of the creek, a man drove posts in a sacred ground. Red Elk's jaw tightened. "They were warned," he said softly. His second, a younger man named Little Hawk, scowled. "We told them." Cutter told them. Still they dig. Red Elk dismounted slowly, his knees stiff but steady. He stood in silence for a long moment, eyes tracing the land. The pale spiral of cairn stones above the creek, the ridge beyond, and the valley below that still carried his ancestors' songs beneath the soil. He closed his eyes. "This place is where the spirits of the Great Bear and the Old Ones walk," he said quietly. "They sleep now, but when their rest is broken, they awaken in anger." The white man's God should have told Cutter that truth long ago. Little Hawk spat into the dirt. "Their heads are full of deaf teaching." Red Elk raised a hand. "Not all." Cutter listens, though the storm around him does not. They watched as the settler, Elias Hartwell, worked methodically, each strike of his hammer carrying across the still air. His wife hung laundry by the water's edge, smaller figures moving beneath the pale quilts. Red Elk's face hardened. "They build their house upon bones," he murmured. "And soon, those bones will remember." Little Hawk shifted his weight. "Shall we drive them out now?" Red Elk shook his head. "No, not with blood, not first. I will speak once more. If words fail, the mountain will decide. The spirits of Ghost Rock do not need our blades." He climbed back onto his horse, turning slowly from the ridge. "We will return tomorrow evening. Bring the bear totem and the pipe. If they are still there by sunset, the ground itself will speak for us." The men followed him down the trail, their shadows long across the bright valley. Below, Martha looked up from her wash line, shading her eyes. She thought she saw movement along the ridge, dark shapes, horsemen, but when she blinked, they were gone. Only the wind remained, faint and restless through the grass. She turned toward the cabin where Elias worked, her heart tightening in her chest. "Elias," she called softly, "I think someone's watching again." He drove another nail into the plank wall, never looking up. "Then let him watch," he said. "We've done nothing wrong." High on a ridge, a hawk circled once, crying out sharp and mournful as if it already knew how the story would end. Chapter 11. The Council at Cutter's Table. The Cutter cabin glowed warm against the encroaching dusk, lamplight spilling gold through the windows onto the darkening prairie. The smell of wood smoke, coffee, and cured meat filled the air as four men gathered around the heavy pine table Nathaniel had built his first winter on the prairie. Each knot and grain smoothed by his own hands, the surface now bearing the scars of 6 years' worth of meals, maps, and hard decisions. The sound of Josie's hands busy at the stove softened the edges of their tense talk, the quiet scrape of her wooden spoon against cast iron, a rhythm they'd all learned to find comfort in. Outside, the early crickets began to hum, their song rising as the heat of the day bled away into cool evening. David Harney arrived first, as he always did. A man who believed punctuality was a form of respect. He leaned back in his chair now, hat tipped low over a lined brow, the brim, shadowing eyes that had seen the Mississippi run both calm and killing. The oldest of the four, he'd once been a riverboat man, his hands learning the language of current and rope before they ever touched prairie soil. The panic of '79 had taken nearly everything. His boat, his savings, the quiet dream of a house in St. Louis. But it hadn't taken his steadiness. That ran deeper than money ever could. His calloused fingers drummed once against the table's edge, then stilled. When Harney spoke, men listened, not because his voice carried volume, but because it carried weight. Tonight his shoulders sagged, just slightly, the way a roof beam settles under the first heavy snow. Rick Hogan sat across from him, boots untied and caked with the red dust of his forge, laces trailing across the floor like he'd walked straight from his work without pause. Which he had. His hair, graying early at the temples despite him being barely 40, caught the lamplight in streaks of silver. Shoulders broad as a barn wall, hands scarred and thickened from years of gripping hot iron, he carried himself with the deliberate care of a man who knew the cost of a careless moment. He was a smith by trade, and everything about him, the slow blink, the measured breath, the way he set his coffee cup down with barely a sound, spoke of a man who worked iron and wagons with the same patience he used to pick his words. A hammer rested against his chair, brought by habit, and when he finally spoke, his voice came low and rough, like a file drawn across metal. "Storm's been building all week," he said, though everyone knew he wasn't talking about weather. Lee Powers, the youngest of them at 32, couldn't sit still. He paced near the window, boot heels tapping in anxious rhythm against the pine boards, his shadow long and restless across the wall. His face was flushed. Part exertion from the hard ride over, part the burning impatience that had driven him west in the first place and had never quite left him. He'd come to Montana running from something he never named, and though he'd built a decent homestead and married a good woman, there was still a wildness in his eyes, a barely bridled energy that made him the first to act and the last to sleep. His fingers drummed against the window frame, and when he turned back toward the table, his jaw was set tight. "We're wasting time talking when we should be writing," he said, the words tumbling out quick and sharp. Nathaniel recognized the fear beneath the bluster. Powers had lost a brother to violence back in Kansas, and a memory made him see threats in every shadow. Nathaniel stood by the hearth, arms folded, gaze distant on the fire. These were his men. Not by blood, but by something just as binding. They'd broken ground together, buried children together, stood watch through winters that tested faith and summers that tested will. Each face around his table carried lines that the prairie had carved, stories written in sunburn and frost crack, in the set of a jaw or the stillness of weathered hands. "Well," Harney said at last, "we tried plain talk. Man still sitting on sacred ground like it's his birthright. What now?" "Red Elk saw it," Nathaniel said. "Rode out this morning. He'll speak one more time, but after that..." He trailed off. Hogan nodded grimly. "After that, the Crow'll handle it their way." Powers stopped his pacing. "And that means blood." None of them argued. Josie crossed the room quietly, poured a cup of coffee for her husband, and set it beside him without a word. Nathaniel gave her a faint smile of thanks. "We can't let that happen," he said. The peace ain't perfect, but it's life. We lose that. We lose everything we've built these 6 years. Harney rubbed a calloused hand over his chin. Maybe we help him move. If we show up with wagons, tools, maybe we can make it look like a fresh start instead of a sentence. Hogan nodded. A man's pride is the heaviest thing he owns. You push him, he digs deeper. But if we steer him quiet, lend a hand, call it neighborly, we might yet turn him. Powers snorted. And what if he still won't budge? You saw that look in his eye, Nat. He's dug in body and soul. Man's tired enough to mistake stubbornness for faith. Nathaniel looked down into his cup. Then maybe Red Elk will see that we tried. Josie's voice cut through gently. And what if Red Elk don't care who tried? What if it's all the same after blood spilled? The men fell silent. The fire popped. One loud report, a small echo of the tension simmering between them. Finally, Harney stood, taking up his hat. I'll ride with you again at first light. Hogan, Powers. Same for you. Both nodded. Powers sighed. Let's hope daylight's enough to cool heads, both sides. Nathaniel met each of their eyes in turn. They had come west together, carve a life out of dust and burl elm, shared harvests, births, losses. Now the peace that tied their families together could unravel with one man's refusal. He turned toward the dark window. Storm clouds gathered again on the horizon. Thin, copper ribboning that caught the dying light. We ride at dawn, he said. Chapter 12. In the quiet hours. The men had gone. The house had settled back into stillness, with only the wind scratching at the shutters and the faint tick of the cooling stove. Nathaniel sat alone at the table, the lamplight throwing gold across his rough hands. Josie lingered near the window, watching the last glow fade beyond the prairie. The children slept above, their dreams steady, easy. For the moment, it was only the two of them, the same quiet they'd known 100 times before, and yet it felt heavier now, burdened by what the next dawn might bring. She turned slowly, her face soft but lined with thought. You mean to ride again tomorrow? I do, Nathaniel said. We'll try once more to move that family before Red Elk does something none of us can mend. Josie folded her arms and leaned against the wall. You think they'll listen this time? He gave a small shake of his head. I don't know. Elias is a hard man to move. Might be too worn down to care anymore. She was quiet a moment, her eyes drawn to the open Bible that rested on the shelf beside the hearth. I remember feeling like that once, she said at last. The year we came west. When we lost. The second. Baby and the wagon cracked an axle near the river. I remember sitting by that fire, wondering if the Lord had let us out here just to bury more of ourselves under his sky. Nathaniel stood and came beside her, resting a hand on her shoulder. You never showed it. I didn't have the luxury to, she said, turning to face him. But I understand that woman. I feel for Martha. The kind of fear that wakes you first in the morning and don't let go even when the sun's bright. She's trapped between her husband's pride and her own knowing. I've lived pieces of that. Nathaniel watched her closely. If you were in her place, what would you want? Her eyes softened. A neighbor who didn't just warn me, but helped me move before my world burned. Nathaniel nodded slowly. We're trying. Josie pressed her palm over his hand. Then try harder. A long silence stretched between them. The wind eased outside, the prairie breathing shallowly in the dark. Somewhere beyond the window, a coyote cried, long and lonesome. She looked up at him again. You've always kept your word, Nat. Keep it now. Keep peace if you can. Don't let what's coming swallow us all. He drew her close, resting his forehead against hers. I'll do what I can. But sometimes peace won't stand still long enough to hold. She smiled faintly. Then you chase it till it does. The lamp guttered once, and the shadows lengthened across the floor. They stood there a moment longer, the sound of their breathing almost lost to the restless whisper of the grass outside. Tomorrow would come early. Chapter 13. The Way to Morning. The first light came cold and gray, spilling thin through the cracks in the half-finished cabin. A soft wind pressed through the open doorway, carrying the smell of sage and damp earth. Martha Hartwell stirred before the others, sitting up on her ticking mattress, a chill wrapping around her like a shawl she couldn't shake. Elias still slept beside her, his breath even, heavy with a man's kind of sleep. The kind earned by work, not peace. Outside, the horses grazed quietly. Beyond them the ridge loomed high and pale in the dawn, Ghost Rock catching the first gold against its face. Martha sat watching that ridge for a long time. Even in daylight, it unsettled her. The spiral of stones gleamed like bone in sunlight, sharp and deliberate. Every morning since they'd come, it seemed to catch her eyes first thing, as though it meant to remind her that she didn't belong here. She rose quietly, pulling her skirt around her, and stepped outside. The air bit cold against her bare arms. The fire from the night before had died to soft gray ash. She crouched to stir it back to life, but every sound, every scrape of metal, every rustle of grass, felt too loud. The land itself seemed to listen. She looked back toward the cabin, where her children still slept in the wagon beside the door. Her throat tightened. She thought of the home they'd left behind in Missouri, the neighbors who'd waved them off, the wild promise they'd chased ever since. She'd told herself it was for the children. That the frontier meant something new, something better. But now the open world felt like an endless hollow where dreams went to die. A shape flickered along the ridge, dark against the rising light. Then another. Riders, perhaps, silent but sure. Her chest squeezed. Elias, she whispered, stepping back toward the doorway. He stirred, sitting up groggily. Martha? There's someone up there again, she said. He swung his legs off the bed, rubbing his eyes. We went through this yesterday. Probably Cutter and his men coming back to talk. She shook her head slowly. No. These don't ride like settlers. Elias stood, jaw tightening, reaching for his rifle by the door. If they want words, they'll get them. I'm done being chased off ground that's as much God's as theirs. Her voice cracked. Elias, listen to me. This isn't just ground. Can't you feel it? He turned, looking at her with something almost kinder than anger. Pity, maybe. You've been afraid since we left Billings. This land scares you because it's wild. But that's why we came. So our boys would grow up knowing the world's big enough to fight for. Martha swallowed hard, tears shining at the edges of her eyes. You're not fighting for them anymore. You're fighting the wind. And you'll lose. He shouldered the rifle. Then let the wind come. Outside, the sun broke free of the horizon, washing the valley in gold. The light touched everything. The creek, the wagons, the pale stones on the ridge, and turned them the color of fire. Martha stood in the doorway a long time after Elias walked out, her hands trembling as she held her shawl tight. She could still feel the night's cold deep in her bones. It wasn't leaving. She knew it wouldn't. Chapter 14. The weight of work. The sun had barely touched the tops of the cottonwoods when Nathaniel Cutter stepped from his cabin, the cool air still thick with dew. The prairie glistened under a pale morning mist. He stood for a long moment on the porch, coffee cup in hand, eyes tracing the low ridge that fell away toward Ghost Rock. Somewhere out there, the Hartwells were waking to another day on borrowed ground. Behind him, Josie moved quietly through the kitchen, packing bread, smoked meat, and dried apples into a canvas sack. "You'll be gone most of the day?" she asked. "Likely," Nathaniel said. "If all goes well, we'll get him clear to the valley north of Peterson's by sundown. Hogan says the creek still runs steady there." She hesitated, tying the sack cord. "You think they'll go without a fight this time?" Nathaniel exhaled through his nose. "I like to believe so. But a man's pride." He didn't finish the thought. Out in the yard, his boys were already hard at work. Owen, tall and lean, was loading fence tools and ropes into the wagon. Levi and Samuel followed behind with shovels, spare planks, and bundles of oats. The clatter of wood and iron echoed clear in the crisp air. When the horses were hitched, Nathaniel checked the harness one last time. "You boys remember what we're about here," he said quietly. "We're going to help a neighbor, not to shame him. Show respect, even if you don't want it." "Yes, sir," Owen said. Josie stepped out as the men of the settlement began to arrive. David Harney, riding at the head of his wagon, a calm authority in the set of his shoulders. Rick Hogan, driving a team that looked strong enough to pull a house. And Lee Powers, already grinning through his nerves, a half-dozen older boys trailing in their wake. The yard filled with movement and low voices. Harney's eldest son, Ephraim, brought over sacks of grain and seed, setting them beside Nathaniel's load. "Pa said if the new place has got any soil to it, they can plant winter rye," he said. "Smart idea," Nathaniel replied. "It'll give him something come spring." Across the wagons, Hogan's deep voice rolled steady. "If we get there before noon, I reckon we can haul their goods, the coop, maybe even part of that shed he started. No sense letting work go to waste. Lee snorted. If he lets us. Nathaniel gave him a look that checked the grin. He'll let us. One way or another. They worked another half hour, securing tools, blankets, and enough supplies to replant a life. The boys talked quietly among themselves. The kind of talk that filled space between duty and fear. By the time the sun sat clear above the hills, everything was ready. 15 souls stood in the Cutter yard. 4 fathers, 11 sons. They weren't armed for war, but there was a solemnity in their faces that said they all knew what rode with them. Chance, pride, and the hope that reason might still matter. Nathaniel climbed onto the wagon seat and took the reins. Let's be about it, then, he said. Before the day grows old. As the wagons rolled out, Josie stood in the doorway, her shawl drawn close, watching them fade into the morning haze. She didn't wave, didn't call out. Just pressed a hand to her heart and whispered a prayer the prairie wind might carry. Out past the first rise, Nathaniel glanced back once, saw her figure small against the house, then faced south toward the ridge. Somewhere beyond it, between stubbornness and faith, lay the Hartwells. And maybe the end of the piece he'd worked half a life to build. Chapter 15. The Gathering at Ghost Rock. The line of wagons creaked over the last hill before the Hartwell clearing, their wheels cutting deep into the soft, rain-darkened soil. The morning sunlight was sharp and clear, throwing long shadows across the valley. Nathaniel raised a hand, signaling the group to slow. Below them, the Hartwells' rough homestead sat quiet. A half-finished shed, wagons parked askew, smoke curling lazily from a small fire. The creek glittered nearby, cutting a silver seam through the hollow. Looks peaceful enough, David Harney murmured. Too peaceful, said Lee Powers. Like a man holding his breath. Nathaniel motioned them forward. Let's not startle them. We're friends, not deputies. They rolled down into the valley, the sound of hooves muffled in wet grass. Martha saw them first. She'd been hanging blankets near the wagon and froze mid-motion. Elias emerged a moment later from the half-built cabin, his axe slung across his shoulder. He squinted into the morning glare until he recognized the lead rider. Cutter, he said flatly. Didn't expect a whole army. Nathaniel dismounted slowly, dusting his palms on his trousers. Morning, Elias. We brought wagons. Thought you might need an extra hand lifting your things. Elias frowned. My things? They're right where I put them. That's the trouble, Nathaniel said gently. Friend, you know why we're here. There's land north. A good stretch near Peterson's Valley. Water, timber, no trouble from anyone. We'll haul your goods and get you set before sundown. Elias' laugh carried no humor at all. So this is it. You and your boys kind of pack me up whether I'll do it or not. Harney lifted a hand, calm and measured. Ain't like that, Mr. Hartwell. Nobody's here to strong-arm you. We're trying to save you grief. Rick Hogan stepped forward, voice low. Red Elk's people are moving, Elias. They told Cutter this morning they'd be here soon. to settle what they see as a trespass. The blood seemed to drain from Martha's face. "Elias," she began. He held up a hand. "No. They've no right to tell me where I can and can't live. The government said the treaty land stops miles south of here." Nathaniel turned a weary gaze toward the ridge. "You think paper stops men whose fathers hunted this land and buried their dead beneath it? Treaties don't hold ground. Respect does." Martha's voice trembled. "Please, Elias, listen." He stood rigid, jaw tight. The hammer in his hand trembled, just barely. "You'd have me run again? After everything we lost?" He looked around at the assembled wagons, the sons watching in uneasy silence. "You all talk about peace, but I think you're just afraid to claim what's yours." Levi Cutter shifted in his saddle, whispering, "Pa, look." Nathaniel followed his gaze. High on the far ridge, a faint shimmer of movement caught the sun. Riders, dark and still, silhouetted against the sky. Nobody spoke for a long moment. Then Nathaniel said softly, "We're out of time." Martha reached for Elias's arm. "You said they'd talk, Nathaniel." Her voice wavered. "Tell me they'll talk." He swallowed hard. "They might, but not long." Elias looked up at the ridge, squinting into the glare. His hand fell away from the hammer. His shoulders sagged. "If I leave now, I lose everything." Harney stepped closer, quiet but firm. "If you stay, you might lose more." The wind picked up, brushing the grass in long, shivering waves. On the ridge, one of the riders raised a hand. Not in greeting, but in signal. Nathaniel's heart sank. "Get your people inside," he said. "Now!" Chapter 16. The Stand at Ghost Rock. The riders on the ridge were motionless now, 5 dark shapes against the sunlit sky. The air between the crow and the settlers hung heavy and taut, every breath loud enough to feel. Nathaniel Cutter could sense the horses' unease. Hooves pawing, nostrils flaring, as if they, too, knew how thin the piece had stretched. Elias Hartwell stood in the open space between his wagon and half-built cabin, the axe limp in his hand. The men from the settlement, their sons fanned behind them, watched in silence. Nathaniel stepped forward slowly. "Elias," he said quietly, "you see them up there?" Elias didn't answer. "They ain't guessing at what you're building. They know. That ridge is holy ground. Red Elk reminded me days ago. His father's father was buried under those stones. You look at that firewood stack, that coop, your cabin frame. Every plank you drive into this soil drives through memory." Elias's face was tight with strain. "You expect me to run again? I can't. There's nowhere left to go." Nathaniel nodded. "I know that feeling, friend. I've seen good men break from it. But this," he gestured toward the valley, the creek, the ridge. "This isn't the place to die, proving you can stand your ground." Harney moved up beside him. His voice was quieter, older somehow. "You remember what it felt like to hold Martha's hand when the first boy was born? When you saw her safe? That's the ground you ought to stand on." Not this. Rick Hogan added gently, "We can build again, Elias." We all did. Took us years, yes. But it can be done. You'll never get back the land if you lose the ones meant to share it with you. Martha's voice broke through then. Thin but steady. He's right. She stepped from the wagon, her eyes shimmering in the morning light. I've known this land would take us the moment we came. Every night, I've heard it in the wind, in the creek. I try to believe your strength was safety, Elias. But it's only a wall you build to keep the truth from reaching you. Elias turned to her, his expression crumbling. Martha. She stepped closer. You think staying proves your will. It don't. It just proves we're the fear's bigger in love. Don't make me bury our children for one more mile of stubborn ground. The silence that followed pressed on them all. The wind caught her hair and scattered it across her face like threads of gold. A boy behind Owen Cutter sniffled, eyes wide, uncertain. Elias dropped his head, shoulders shaking once. The axe slipped from his fingers and hit the dirt with a dull thud. Nathaniel took a slow breath. We've got wagons ready. Northland's open and waiting. You won't have more than a season to build, but you'll live to see it through. Come with us. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Elias looked at his wife, and whatever steel had held him there broke apart. He nodded faintly. All right, he said hoarsely. We'll go. Behind them, as if the land itself had been holding its breath, the wind shifted direction, sweeping down the ridge toward them. The riders above had lowered their hands. Red Elk watched from his horse, the faintest nod given before he turned his mount westward. Nathaniel saw it, exhaling the breath he didn't know he'd held. Let's get moving, he said. Harney and Hogan stepped into motion, their sons leading teams forward. The younger boys were quick, untying, lifting, helping. Martha gathered her children, whispering soft prayers. Elias joined them silently, his pride dimmed but not gone. Only tempered now into something gentler. Resolve. As the wagons turned north, a hawk screamed overhead, circling once before veering away toward the mountains. For the first time in days, the valley of Ghost Rock was silent again. Chapter 17. The North Valley. The wagons moved slow and steady across the prairie, wheels whispering through the grass, the horses snorting white breath into the cool air. The sky had softened to that pale, late summer blue that promised autumn was near. Nathaniel rode ahead with Elias at his side, silence between them, but no longer heavy. Only thoughtful, worn down to understanding. Behind them trailed the long line of wagons. Harney and his sons leading one, Powers and Hogan following close, and the younger boys perched along the tailgates, legs swinging as they watched the land roll by. They crossed low hills that rose and fell like waves of earth, each crest revealing another shallow valley ahead. A narrow stream glinted through the dips, bright against the tawny grass. It traced the course northward, a silver ribbon guiding them into quieter country. When they reached the broader waters, the sound changed. Rushing now steady and deep. The wagons forded careful across, the horse's hooves splashing through clear current that caught light like glass. Children leaned from the wagons, pointing at minnows darting in the flow. For the first time in days, laughter came easy again. They passed the Peterson place just before noon, its wide fields golden with late grain, smoke curling from a steady chimney. Old man Peterson waved from his porch, eyebrow lifted at the sight of the convoy. Nathaniel raised a hand in return, but didn't slow the team. The work ahead still waited. 3 miles north, the land grew greener. An open stretch framed by low hills and dotted with pine. The air there smelled of resin and cool water. Nathaniel turned the lead wagon west and followed the sound of the stream until it opened at last into a broad meadow bordered by tall trees. The place felt right. The men reined in and dismounted, taking in the lay of the land. The gentle slopes sheltering from wind, the flat ground near the creek, the grove that would give shade and timber both. The stream murmured softly nearby, and the breeze whispered low through the pine crowns. Elias stepped down beside his wife and stood still for a long time, his gaze sweeping the horizon. He had no words, only a slow nod of the head, as if he were afraid to speak too soon and break whatever blessing had just found them. Nathaniel joined him, resting a hand on the wagon's rail. "This'll do," he said. "You've got water right close, soil that'll take the seed, and windbreaks from every side. You give it care, it'll give it back." Martha's eyes glistened, though her smile carried something real this time. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It'll be home," Elias said quietly, his voice rough. Within minutes, the meadow came alive with the sound of work. The creak of harness leather, the thump of stakes, the rhythm of men setting down tools. The younger boys led the horses to water, while others began unloading lumber and gear. Even the older sons grinned through the sweat, eager in the simple labor of new beginnings. As the sun sank toward the ridges, the shadows of the pines stretched long across the field, and the breeze shifted into a steady hush that carried through the needles overhead. Nathaniel stood apart for a moment, watching the family's work. Their laughter, their drive, the strange peace that had come at last. He thought of Josie waiting back home and of Red Elk riding beyond those far southern hills, perhaps relieved, perhaps still watching. The land had a silence to it again, but not the kind that warned. It was the quiet of promise. He touched the brim of his hat, turned toward his wagon, and smiled. "Let's build you a home, Elias," he said. Chapter 18. Across the Divide. The afternoon sun slanted low across the prairie when Nathaniel Cutter spotted a lone rider approaching from the south. He was standing by the corral, checking the fence line, when the silhouette emerged from the shimmer of heat rising over the grass. Even from a mile off, Nathaniel knew the man by the straightness of his back, by the deliberate pace of the horse that carried him. "Red Elk," he murmured. By the time the rider reached the yard, Josie had come out onto the porch, shading her eyes. Nathaniel wiped his hands on his trousers and walked forward, stopping a few steps short as Red Elk dismounted. The Crow leader's horse snorted softly, tugging the reins against the summer breeze. For a moment, neither man spoke. Then Red Elk laid a hand across his chest in greeting. You still listen to the wind, he said. That is good. Nathaniel managed a faint smile. Hard not to out here. The wind tells more truth than most men do. Red Elk's eyes traveled over the homestead. The barn, the tidy garden, the yard that showed both hard labor and quiet pride. Your hands build peace as well as walls, he said. Nathaniel nodded toward the south. The Hartwells have settled north now, by Peterson's Creek. The land's good, and they'll manage. I'm told Martha and the children have already begun cutting for a winter garden. I know, Red Elk said softly. My scouts watched from the ridges to be sure they went. When the valley emptied, the spirits quieted. Ghost Rock sleeps again. He paused, glancing toward the mountains beyond the horizon. No blood was spilled. That is rarer than rain. Nathaniel exhaled slowly. I wasn't sure it would end that way. You made it so. Red Elk stepped closer. Many white men talk of peace. You built it with your hands. Not by words, but by the weight of your actions. Nathaniel looked down, uncomfortable under the praise. I don't know if it was peace or just luck that saved us. Red Elk gave a slight smile. Luck visits fools and brave men alike. But peace, that only comes where truth is honored. For a long moment, they stood side by side, gazing out over the tall grass, swaying in the wind. The light was turning amber now, soft and rich, the kind of light that absorbs everything it touches. Finally, Red Elk said, "The mountain remembers today. So will my people. When the snow falls, we will bring meat for the family who traveled north. We will do this not as trade, but as neighbors." Nathaniel swallowed hard and nodded. You got my thanks. There'll always be a seat by my fire for you. Red Elk mounted again, reins loose in his hand. Before turning, he looked back once. Keep teaching your sons what you've learned, Cutter. The land listens to them too. Then he was gone. A quiet figure slipping back into the wavering distance, the sun behind him casting long shadows eastward. Josie came down from the porch, her eyes watching the rider fade into the light. That was Red Elk? Nathaniel nodded. Aye. She folded her arms, voice soft. The Lord works strange threads in this world, Nat. Storms, loss, and somehow peace. He looked toward the horizon where man and mountain met in gold light. Maybe they're all the same thing, he said. And as the wind swept gently through the grass, bending every blade in the same quiet direction, the last light of day disappeared behind the peaks of the Beartooth, as Red Elk calls it, or the Beartooth Mountain Range, where, for now at least, the land was still. Chapter 19. Winter Promise. By late November, frost traced white lace along the edges of Peterson's Creek, and thin skeins of smoke curled from 3 new chimneys in the northern valley. The Hartwells' cabin stood solid now, its walls tight, its roof heavy with the first dusting of snow. Inside, Martha moved quietly about the stove, stirring a pot that filled the air with the scent of stew and wood smoke. The children played at her feet, laughing, their faces pink from the cold. Elias sat by the window, mending a harness strap, his rough hands gentler now. Outside, the day lay hushed and still. The low winter sun cast long blue shadows across the snow-dusted grass. The wind had dropped, replaced by a silence that felt heavy but kind, like the world breathing slow. A movement at the tree lean caught Elias's eye. Dark shapes threading between the pines. He rose at once, stepping to the door. 5 riders came down the slope from the south, horses stepping light through the drifts. At their head rode Red Elk, wrapped in a heavy buffalo coat, feathers braided into his silver-streaked hair. The others led 2 trailing ponies, each burdened with dressed meat and bundles of furs. Martha came to his side, hand to her mouth. Elias pushed the door open, the cold rushing in on a glitter of snow. Mr. Cutter said, he began, but his words choked. Red Elk stopped before the cabin and looked up at him, eyes calm and unreadable. Winter comes early this year, he said. We bring meat and warm gift for the season. The mountain remembers words kept. Elias swallowed hard. We're grateful. The Crow leader nodded, then turned to Martha. You make a good home here. The land accepts you now. Her throat tightened. We never meant to trespass. He studied her for a moment. You listened when the ground spoke. That is enough. Nathaniel Cutter and his sons arrived soon after, wagon creaking under firewood and salt. The whole clearing filled with sound. The thud of hooves, the laughter of boys stacking logs, the murmured greetings of 2 worlds that had touched war and stepped back from it. By evening, a new fire burned high before the cabin, casting orange light across snow and pine trunks. Red Elk shared words few understood, but all felt the warmth in them. Nathaniel stood quiet beside Elias, the wind tugging at their coats. Can't say I thought we'd see peace like this again, Elias murmured. Nathaniel smiled faintly. Peace doesn't stand still. You got to keep walking beside it. Red Elk bowed his head once, then turned his horse toward the southern trail. As his riders faded into the dark, soft flakes began to fall. The first real snow of winter. Martha watched the silver shapes vanish into whiteness. She slipped her hand into her husband's, fingers cold but steady. For the first time since the long road west, she felt safe. Nathaniel Cutter lifted his face to the falling snow, and somewhere far off, wind moved gently through the pines. A whisper of gratitude between earth and sky.